Greetings, this is Silas, and this is part of my Anyone But K series. On the screen is going to be a speed drawing of Jon Stewart Mill, who is one of the people that I'm adding to my Anyone But K series. And my Anyone But K series, just said it over and over again, is about just me replacing Che Guevara. And Che Guevara he's a despotic Cuban dictator, revolutionary. People have these ideas of who he is, and they kind of wear him on the shirt without actually knowing who he actually was. And I've seen people all around the world wearing this shirt, seeing this imagery somewhere, because it has a good aesthetic. So with this, I was thinking, there's many other people, anyone but K could be on these shirts, could be using that same aesthetic, and be better for you to actually have on there. So I have a bunch of people up in that series, and Jon Stewart Mill is the next one. I'll be trying to keep this up with every new person I'm adding to this series. For some of them before, I'll do something separate where it's not necessarily directly from them, but having to do with them. Like, for example, when I did Frederick Douglass in this series, I read an article called "The Constitution Ended Slavery, Politicians Prolonged It." And with this article, as some of you might know about the US Constitution, there was the three-fifths compromise, as they say, where black people were considered politically three-fifths of a person. And in this article, the person who wrote it goes in about how Frederick Douglass, the famous abolitionist, was one of the central figures in pushing that through and granting black Americans, former slaves, and people coming from Africa and things like that after the Constitution was ratified, a full personship in the United States of America. So something like that is something that I think, okay, that's a great person. There's a lot of positive things Frederick Douglass has done in my life and the lives of millions and probably billions of people in the world, a lot more than Che Guevara, and that's something that I can personally benefit from. That's why I'd include someone like him in the Anyone But K series. Now on to Jon Stewart Mill. Why is Jon Stewart Mill? Who is Jon Stewart Mill before I get into the things about Jon Stewart Mill? And this one's going to be a couple of quotes directly from him. So Jon Stewart Mill was a 19th century philosopher that stressed the importance of empiricism. Now for me, I am an empiricist. It's one of the things where people say I'm almost pedantic. I just get into the semantics of things, try to be very specific on the things I actually engage in, to the point where I will not engage in many things I think has kept me back from it. So maybe I can kind of play around with that and take a bit of more calculated risks and things like that, or just have some more confidence in the little that I know about certain things. But I'm always like, why? Why are you doing this? Why should that be that way? Why should we do this way? Show me the actual evidence that I can test, like solid evidence. I could just say an opinion is a form of evidence. A feeling is a form of evidence, but it's not empirical evidence. So for me, being an empiricist, that's something that I value a lot. And Jon Stewart Mill was one of the earlier people who really stressed the importance of empiricism. And his work in this sense was second to none. Mill was also a naturalist, a utilitarian, and a liberal who worked to bridge the prevalent, or is it prevalent? Prevalent, I think it's prevalent. The prevalent and important ways of thinking between the 18th and 19th centuries. Jon Stewart Mill wrote many books. He spoke in different places. He was rather well known even during his time. He was rather well respected and things like that. You have some time where I think this is more in the past, where a lot of people weren't appreciated as much until after they died. And this is one thing that I think is positive about current timeline, is many of the people right now who are alive at this time are rather appreciated well for the things that they're doing and the contributions they give to different fields. Whether you agree with those fields or not, that's another thing, but I think it's good to actually see people who put efforts into something and actually get some sort of recognition of that while they're alive. So he wrote several books, spoke in many places, took some different quotes from different locations to kind of get together, and I'm just going to now start the journey through this. Okay, so the first one is this. Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. And that was Jon Stewart Mill in an inaugural address delivered to the University of St. Andrews. And the next one, which is related to that, a person may cause evil to others, not only by his actions, but by his inaction. And in either case, he's justly accountable to them for the injury. Now, this is from Jon Stewart Mill on Liberty, which is one of his more well-known books. Now, with both of these, you've probably heard similar kind of quotes with this. And I was thinking I might actually do a separate quote because something, as I mentioned, I'm a empiricist. I like going to the etymology of things, understanding where things came from. And there's this quote investigator site that really just goes and breaks down these things. It's just right in my, it's like catnip to someone like me. Okay, so with the quote, you've probably thought of this quote when I was saying that. It's probably come to mind already. It's the quote of, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing." Now, John F. Kennedy, Edmund Burke, R. Murray Hillsop, Charles F. Ackhead and Jon Stewart Mill are people who are up on that. So by the time you actually listen to this, I might have recorded that already, and it would be somewhere, links somewhere around this where you actually listen to this, and just check for other content and things like that. But getting back to what he was saying here, what Jon Stewart Mill said with this, I think this is a true thing. This is something that, especially when he's talking about here with the inaction, there's a lot of people who, on one end, are called to be activists. And there's this hashtaggivism that I see where people just tweet things and then they feel they've done something. I think part of the reason that the current pandemic, while I'm recording this, is going on is a lot of people didn't really feel like they had a lot of purpose in their day-to-day lives. But then when they had this and they could say, okay, all I have to do is stay home. All I have to do is quarantine. All I have to do is social distance. All I have to do is wear this mask. And I'm somehow saving these people all around the world. So it gives you some purpose that you've done some action, but it's almost action through inaction in some of those things, like just staying home. And then now some of the people are being asked to go back to their lives, like pre-pandemic, going back to the new normal, whatever people say with that thing. And that normal that they had was not fulfilling. It wasn't a situation where they thought they were actually doing something. So you're asking them to stop doing this thing that was supposedly good, and they don't want to go back to that kind of thing. And then there's people on the inverse who are seeing certain injustices going on in the world, and they're like, people are getting canceled. Oh, I might lose my job and things like this. Oh, this person might not like me anywhere if I say this. Whereas those people and those things that are happening are actually slowly chipping away at the magnificent things that we have in society that people might take for granted. And they think just a small discomfort. I know for some people it's a much bigger situation with, I have 3 or 4 people depending on me to actually go to this job. So I'm not going to stir the pot here. I'm not going to speak out on these certain issues. But if it's just somewhere online, if it's somebody saying something, why don't people actually do something? And there's actually inaction going on with some people that's causing certain injuries that I think could be avoided in the world. And I think this is a common saying. This is something that I think many other people would have said. It's something that I think speaks to a lot of people. And him setting this out in words in this kind of way and pushing this out there, I think is a positive thing to let people know that no, actually just acting itself is actually something. And then now also this accountable for the injury thing. Where is the responsibility? We're seeing a few actual cases one case in the United States of America going on right now, where there was an unfortunate shooting in the school in Oxford, Michigan, and the parents are being held accountable for that. I'm going to do a separate talk about that. But what do you think about that? Should the parents have done more? Should the school have done more? Who should have done more in this situation? Who was accountable by not doing something? There was one of the actual young men supposedly tried to rush the person who was shooting, and he ended up losing his life. He still did something good, but maybe more people would have lost their lives if you didn't. So that's the kind of mentality that I think you go with this kind of thought. Let me know what you think about these quotes. Okay, the next one is, I have learned to seek my happiness by limiting my desires rather than in an attempt to satisfy them. And this is just by Jon Stewart Mill, and I didn't really find when he said this. It was just somebody who was talking to him and he said this. But this is something that's kind of like with the whole like Buddhist type of mentality that some people say, the spirituality, the minimalism type of thing, where it's just reduce your wants and needs. And there's a lot of people who think they need certain things, but they just want them. They get those things too confused, and then they end up chasing these things that they just want, and then the things that they need get left in the wayside, or they don't actually appreciate and value that they have most of the things that they need. And I think this is one of the curses of the United States of America and the West, and just westernized places and developed places in general. You see some of these things even here. I'm recording this in Nairobi, Kenya, and you start seeing certain people who seem to have a lot, but they don't really have the valuable things that other people who might need those things see them having them and say, why are you not happy with these things that I personally need in my life? Well, it's because they already have that. They might have taken those things for granted, and they're focused on all these other wants that these people who don't even have the things that they see these people having, the things that they personally need. Once you have those things, it's hard for you without having those things that you need to even imagine the wants that some people can have. Like, there's a $23 million car I just found out. I think Jay-Z and Beyonce bought that car. I don't know why I would personally ever need that car. I don't know if I'd ever desire. It's a beautiful car, the Rolls-Royce Boat Tail, if I'm not mistaken. It's a beautiful car, but even if me and my spouse were worth $1.9 billion like Jay-Z and them were, would I consider myself to want that car? Would that be something I would desire? I don't know. And at the same point, some people like Jay-Z speaks out about the issues like black people, but I guess he doesn't say personally himself because he lives in a society where he's been able to, him and his wife have been able to achieve a life where they're worth 1.9 billion. So I guess he kind of values that. But how much more does he actually desire out of life? Is it just his family? He's got his family, he's got kids. I mean, they've had issues like that elevator incident, but this is my thoughts on this. I think this is a good one where it's just like something that a lot of people can relate with. Now, here we're going to go into a more longer, lengthier quote here. Okay. War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feeling, which thinks that nothing is worth a war, is much worse. When a people are used as a mere human instrument for firing cannon or thrusting bayonets in the service and for the selfish purposes of a master, such war degrades a people. A war to protect other human beings against tyrannical injustice. A war to give victory to their own ideas of right and good, and which is their own war, carried on for an honest purpose by their free choice, is often the means of their regeneration. A man who has nothing which he is willing to fight for, nothing which he cares more about than he does about his personal safety, is a miserable creature who has no chance of being free, unless made and kept so by the exertions of better men than himself. As long as justice and injustice have not terminated their ever-renewing fight for ascendancy in the affairs of mankind, human beings must be willing, when need is, to do battle for the one against the other. And this is Jon Stewart Mill in Principles of Political Economy. Now, this is something that some may think, is this the toxic masculinity? Some might look at it, oh, this is that brave traditional masculinity that is being lost in the West that people need to stand up and talk about. And as I was mentioning before, when some people feel, I'm not going to talk out, I'm not going to speak, and I think, this is just sort of me, I think some people, in many cases, chances are, if you're listening to this, you can probably speak out a bit more in certain situations, whether it's just your personal lives or just somewhere, just someone passing. If you're just like at a grocery store, somebody says something, you just say something, and you say something, oh, that's kind of wrong, and then you just walk away. What's the loss you're going to take from it? The person's not going to track you down and get you fired from your job, but maybe you just pushing back on that thing that that person said might eventually have the knockdown effect of changing that person's mind on a certain topic. And this is one thing that I think is somewhat positive with the whole, people might say like a social justice warrior type of people who are, some of the things get too overly sensitive, but I think in some cases they're at least willing to speak about certain things. Mentioning enough things, like if someone just talks bad about some woman in public, and you just say like, maybe that's not the right thing to say, even if you don't know this person, that's not a negative thing. That might just, the person might have been outright joking, but if they really meant that, they might think, yeah, maybe next time I just won't just say that just blasé in the way that I said it. That's just something that I kind of think. Now, when you talk about the actual details in here, I think that is a key thing. I think there's a lot of things that most of the people here would agree with. Does this apply to women as well, or is he talking about men in the general, like males? There were certain responsibilities and things that to be considered masculine, these were masculine traits, was to be this kind of person, where you didn't necessarily have to be, as you said, there's better men in different situations. So most men were probably these ones who were just kind of floating around. And I think there's a lot of people, not just men, but men, women, and everything else in between, who are currently living in the United States of America, in the West, in certain communities and societies where they don't really have a raison d'etre. They don't really have that reason to feel like I'm waking up today to do something useful. And at the same point, they have this sense that there's all these injustices in the world. And I think part of that is in part having that background radiation of knowledge of what the state is, which is defined by its monopoly of force over a given area, and that someone like his liberal background, my whole anarchist background kind of getting to that situation, by definition, that is what defines the state. Yet you kind of taught that the state is benign, and then the state kind of shifts off certain issues that come from the state existing onto these other nebulous things that you kind of think, okay, I'm going to battle this, when you kind of, I think, subconsciously realize that's not really what you should be battling. That's a ghost. You should actually face this kind of thing and unite together and stand up together and not just be divided in this kind of way of just punching at ghosts, this shadow boxing and things like that. So let me know what you thought about that quote as we move on to the next quote. Stupidity is much the same all the world over. A stupid person's notions and feelings may confidently be inferred from those which prevail in the circle by which the person is surrounded. Not so with those whose opinions and feelings are an emanation from their own nature and faculties. This is by Jon Stewart Mill in The Subjugation of Women. Now, as I mentioned before, that comment of just maybe this person in their group has always been talking about women that way, hasn't really had someone say something, then you say something, and that person is not with that group, and then the next time they're in that group, they mention, oh, by the way, when I said this person said this thing to me, and I was like, okay, some people might be mocking this person, and somebody else in that group that's not even that primary person you talk to may have been kind of on the precipice of bringing something up. He was kind of uncomfortable with the way people were talking about a certain thing, and then while everybody else is laughing, that person finally says, that person might have been right. And then this entire group kind of starts talking about things in a different way. And I think what he's talking about here with the circles, and this happens a lot. I don't necessarily consider it negative when I hear about certain these things that were talked about centuries before or more that I think are accurate observations, because humans are humans and we've changed during the different environments and times. But finding out that somebody made a similar observation about reality that you just have made is not a negative thing, because that kind of gives you some more of that kind of evidence towards the fact, okay, this is actually tested. Maybe people were seeing this and might have been talking about it in a slightly different way. But what does this concept remind you of that's going on right now? Echo chambers. When people are just saying the same things back to each other, where they just think the same things and have that circle, they have that bubble where they only listen to certain sources that reinforce their ideas, and they're kept ignorant to things in the rest of the world. And another thing before going on to the next quote that Mill mentions here, he says, a stupid person's notions and feelings may confidently be inferred from those which prevail in the circle by which the person is surrounded. People might think, okay, this person's just stupid, but yes, they might be stupid about something, they might be uninformed, it might be due to the people that they're around. But some people will look at other people and say, okay, you're ignorant. Like somebody had a comment on this recent thing that Enes Kanter Freedom said about Jeremy Lin, asking why doesn't Jeremy Lin speak out more about Taiwanese issues? And some people were coming back and forth and saying, hey, why should he speak out about this? And one person in particular said this, in response to somebody having a different tweet and actually answering and saying, what gives Americans the moral high ground to call China evil? First of all, I don't think morality is required for you to actually call something out. Somebody could be stabbing you in the process of stabbing you and say stabbing is bad. And they don't have the moral high ground at that point, but they're still accurate in saying stabbing is bad. Okay, so with this, somebody said that, and somebody came in, I guess this was tongue-in-cheek, and said, American opinions are the most important in the world, that's why. They're often also the most misinformed and stupid opinions at the same time. Coincidence? And my general answer to this person is, I've looked around the world. People live in bubbles all over the place. It just happens to be, if you're on Twitter, on Facebook, in certain places, there's going to be a majority of Americans on there. Americans have more of a freedom of speech, so they have the ability to share what they say more. It's not like on average Americans are more stupid or ignorant about general world affairs. You go talk to an average Chinese person, an average Kenyan person, and it doesn't mean that they will know on average more about anything than Americans. They're also used to their bubble. They're also used to the circle of friends around them, the circle of knowledge around them. It's just like when you go on to talk about on Twitter about something in the National Basketball Association, which is a sports league in the United States of America, chances are a lot of people are going to be speaking out about that topic. Enes Kanter Freedom is now an American citizen. He's outspoken in that sense. That freedom of speech, as I mentioned, will give people more chances to expose their certain opinions that you might disagree with. Does not necessarily mean in general, on average, that they're more stupid than other people. Okay, moving on to the next one. And this one is like, is Jon Stewart Mill a feminist? That was from the Subjugation of Women. It's like, this is interesting. And this is a short essay that y'all can go read yourselves. Okay, this is the quote. It is safe to say that the knowledge men can acquire of women, even as they have been and are, never mind what they could be, is wretchedly incomplete and superficial, and that it always will be so until women themselves have told all that they have to tell. And that was Jon Stewart Mill from The Subjugation of Women. So was Jon Stewart Mill a feminist? This essay was published in 1869 and with ideas that he developed jointly with his wife, Harriet Taylor. And the first wave of the feminist movement, I think now people say we might be in fourth wave feminism, the global feminist movement. It originated in the United States of America, and that is usually tied to the first formal women's rights convention that was held in 1848. Now with this one, this is something that people say women need space to speak about their lived experiences. Why are men talking about women's issues? And this is a positive thing. Let other people talk about different things. I say not everything that's good for the goose is good for the gander, because otherwise we'd all be geese. we are a sexually dimorphic species and people go through different things in different ways. We are biologically evolved to want and desire different things. For example, some of the things mentioned in that previous quote about what a man should be willing to do and fight for, it's not necessarily the same things that a woman would. Especially, it's not necessarily they would fight in the same manner. They would not be driven for the same things, for the same goals, and for the same needs and wants, the same desires. Those things are going to differ greatly. And I think it's kind of key. I wonder what Jon Stewart Mill would think about right now with a redefinition of what woman is. Would he still go with like there's male, female, there's woman, man, there's masculine, feminine, where these are three different categories of a same type of sort of thing, sort of dichotomy that you go with. And then there's ways to transition between the two. People might be identifying different genders that they want to define in certain ways. But what would he say about this when he's like, okay, men can now, physical, biological males can now compete in women's sports and achieve certain things that a female, physical female desired, and then that's been taken away by somebody who is physically male who now desires to transition to something else and actually compete in that sense. So what would you think about some of these things, with these different things, the way women is being changed? And some people are saying, okay, now there's been not a subjugation of women, but people were saying, due to the fact that there was a subjugation of women, we need to free them. And then I think there was a moment with the feminist movement where there was a general freedom. People said, but some people said we have a long way to go. And then some people say, okay, now you're kind of erasing the ideal of woman, and now women, the ideal of women is being subjugated in a certain sense or being changed in a certain sense. So that's just something that would be interesting to see what Jon Stewart Mill and his wife, Harriet Taylor, would have thought about this. He may have hinted at some of that by this next quote. I consider it presumption in anyone to pretend to decide what women are or are not, can or cannot be, by natural constitution. They have always hitherto been kept, as far as regards spontaneous development, in so unnatural a state, that their nature cannot but have been greatly distorted and disguised. And no one can safely pronounce that if women's nature were left to its direction as freely as men's, and if no artificial bent were attempted to be given to it except that required by the conditions of human society, and given to both sexes alike, there would be any material difference, or perhaps any difference at all, in the character and capacities which would unfold themselves. And this was Jon Stewart Mill in The Subjugation of Women. So yeah, now this is, which fields would he think that they would just be the same? At that point, it was already an acknowledgement that they are certain differences. Were those differences valid? Are the differences actually from a patriarchal, oppressive society? Which ones of these are just natural adjustments from having limited information at the time, the circles that we were living in at that time, where humans were just trying their best as a Homo sapien species that is inherently gynocentric, that focuses on the desires of the females. The females kind of control certain aspects in society, whether you like it or not. They have a lot of influence in many ways. So trying to define which areas and things like that, was there some kind of disfigurement and unnatural state? And then now talking about this disfigurement and unnatural state, how much does the existence of the state itself in both raising kids and mucking up the actual institution of marriage or the relationships between men and women in those societies where the state kind of provides for certain of the desires of women that they used to desire from men, used to demand men would give them before they granted them sexual access. So they're getting this from the state, and the men are getting their sexual access without actually achieving certain things that were considered manly and masculine to be achieved. And then people say, okay, that's why society is kind of dropping. So there is a mucking of this, as a muddying up of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. That man up type of thing is there, but what is womaning up if there isn't even is a thing like that? Okay, so next one, I think it's a good quote about knowing your worth and finding a complementary partner. Even a really superior man almost always begins to deteriorate when he is habitually, as the phrase is, king of his company. And in his most habitual company, the husband who has a wife inferior to him is always so. And this is Jon Stewart Mill in The Subjugation of Women. And as I mentioned, women have certain influence. People have that saying, behind every great man is a great woman. There was some support. People talk about how, on average, a man who has a wife earns about 10 times as much as a single man, because in many cases they have that complementary partner who's supporting them at home. It used to be in the traditional sense where it's like a stay-at-home mother, or even not a stay-at-home mother, but a woman who's being able to handle other things that the man can't. Not just a simple thing that the females are the ones who gestate and carry the baby, and they have certain connections with that, certain affinities towards it, and then the men in general are stronger and more physical and willing to take certain risks and things like that, and they can go out and earn different things and bring certain resources, and then you can kind of work together to do that. If one parent is good to raise a kid, then two good parents is going to be better matter, be it man, man, woman, woman, man and woman, whatever you want to talk about in that sense, and everything else in between. So that's my general thought on that. I think this is a good saying to kind of say that yes, the women are there, and they're talking about that circle that you're in as well. If you surround yourselves with just stupid people who are not really challenging you, who are not really bringing out the best out of you, then you're going to be dragged down to that level. And if you decide that I'm going to pick a wife who's inferior to me in all ways, then you're going to be dragged down to a more inferior level. It's better to have somebody that will challenge you in certain ways, meet you in certain things, understand you in certain things, and even surpass you in certain things. Because why would you want somebody you're just completely better at everything? I want to say it's not even a pet, but even pets. Pets do things better, like dogs bark and smell, do all these other things, run faster than most people. So there's this different kind of things where I think find somebody that actually complements you in a certain sense. And I think most of the people out there who found that, who are lucky enough to find that, are probably in happy relationships, and I envy you for that. Now on to the last quote I have here from The Subjugation of Women by Jon Stewart Mill. And this is on the intellectual's privilege and institutional regression. To see the futurity of the species has always been the privilege of the intellectual elite, or of those that have learned from them. To have the feelings of that futurity has been the distinction and usually the martyrdom of a still rare elite. Institutions, books, education, society all go on training human beings for the old long after the new has come, much more when it is only coming. And this again is another very fitting quote to things that we see going on. I've mentioned this several times. People are out there and my life isn't really fulfilled, but I've gone through all this education. I'm in the elite. I call these people the illiterati. And you look at these people. Are they happy? Many of the people that you consider to be elites, are they really truly happy? They seem not to be, even though they have so many of the basic needs that people during Jon Stewart Mill's times would not have even imagined that people could have. I think I heard this from Thomas Sowell, who's also one of the people in the Anyone But K series, and he said this about the United States of America. People who are considered poor in the United States of America, on average, have more access to space in their living areas than the average European. Not the average poor European, just the average well-off, middle-class, whatever European has less space. I think this covers both their domicile, their home, and just access to space outside than the average poor American. And there is an aspect of this where when you have more things, I think you have more to lose. You possess more things, things are in your mind, and then you're worrying about if I lose these things. I mentioned that $23 million car. If you don't own a $23 million car, you don't worry about losing a $23 million car. If you don't have $23 million, that's $23 million that you could lose on any particular day. If you only have $230, that might be the only $230 that you have, but you can keep track of that $230 in general a lot easier than you can that $230 million. So if you grow up in a situation where you think there's 2 or 3 jobs I could have, and then you get one of those 2 or 3 jobs, and you're relatively happy with that, you don't really have too many more desires after that, that's kind of where you're living, that's kind of what you're dealing with, your life is relatively good, 2 or 3 women to pick from, 2 or 3 homes to buy, 2 or 3 kids, you're good to have, 2 or 3 is a good number. Then now you have people who might be working in the same location, the same New York City that existed back when Jon Stewart Mill was writing this or something. And that person is 23. And they're working in that office and they're thinking, there's about 230 other jobs I could practically apply for just now. Just in this hour, I could apply for these 230 different jobs. So why am I happy with this? Is it something I really truly want to desire? There's all these other things. Oh, I'm going to go online and I'm going to meet, I'm a woman, I'm in New York City, I'm relatively young, relatively attractive. I'm on social media. I just posted a workout photograph. It's got 2,300 likes already. I just posted it like 30 minutes ago. I'm on like 3 social media platforms. On each of those platforms, I'm getting maybe 100 notifications, 100 identifications, 100 matches and things like that every week. And I think that's probably even a low ball. It's probably even higher than that. But let's say you get 300 a week. So you're having all these options. What exactly do you desire? And they could be some kind of frustration where you have that, it's not a noblesse. It's not a noblesse oblige. It's a noblesse, I don't think like an elite desire where you have these other kind of higher level things that you think you need to achieve in order to be happy, in order to be content. Yet you can actually be relatively happy and functional and effective in a position that you think is below you. And I think this does happen with some of the elites all around the world and things like that. Before moving to the last 3 quotes, just one more thing on that. There's also some kind of noted thing where I've noticed that a lot of people who have a lot of education, a lot of people who are activized in these kind of things, are focusing so much on the things that are coming in the near future. And they don't do a lot of living in the present, and they put a big importance in the lived experiences of the past. They're always looking back. In the past, it was like this. We need to avoid this thing from the past. Or in the past, it was worse in this way. So we definitely need to do this now in order to do that thing in the future. Instead of just living in the moment, realizing that actual progress that has been achieved and taking advantage of those and building some strong foundations in the current present. Because once you have that, once you're already stronger of a person, of a society, of a culture, of a body politic in the present, you'll be able to achieve more in the future, and you'll be able to deal with more of the issues and negative things from the past. So I like to think that focus could be something that is in general positive. Okay, moving on to the next quote. The only freedom which deserves the name is that of pursuing our own good in our own way, so long as we do not attempt to deprive others of theirs or impede their efforts to obtain it. Each is the proper guardian of his own health, whether bodily or mental or spiritual. Mankind are greater gainers by suffering each other to live as seems good to themselves than by compelling each other to live as seems good to the rest. And this is Jon Stewart Mill from On Liberty. Now this one really speaks to me, really gets me right here, gets me right in the cocoa. This is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about right here. This is the thing that we see, like with some of these current justice movements. There's a lot of demands of what other people need to do. It's getting to the point where I don't want you thinking this thing around me. You must attend this thing in this way and do this thing and supply this for me in order for me to achieve this thing. Where is that whole thing of just coming up and saying, I have the freedom in the United States of America, most freedom in general to pursue certain things that we've had in pretty much every civilization and society. Name me one that you think is more. Yeah, I'll try to move there if it's actually there in the world right now, or we can try to build back to that society. But I think we can do a lot better, but it's not going to come from demanding people do things, using the power of the state in order to compel people to do certain things, redistribute resources from people who have achieved certain things that you feel might have been unjust, or you might feel like, I can't do that, but they've gotten that and profited from that, so I need some of that profit, and then you can bring it here, because you didn't build that, you didn't do that, but then did you earn that? And I think people know that. People get that feeling inside. If somebody has done something from you, and you want to feel like you're an independent adult, you feel like you owe them this kind of thing. You don't really achieve that level of contentment of actually doing something on your own. And I think that's, again, part of why people are saying, all I have to do is social distance, all I have to do is wear a mask, all I have to do is just get this card, and you're just asking me to do this, and then I can say that I've saved the world in a grand way. Of course I'm going to do that. Whereas other people are like, hey, I don't mind doing that for myself, but I don't feel the need to force somebody else to that. That doesn't bring me any joy, because I am telling you to do this now, and then the next time something happens that I don't necessarily want, you'll tell me to do this. And you see something with what used to be considered the subjugation of women, right? They used to say, okay, women are subjected to have pregnancies and carry the pregnancies to full term, so we need abortion rights in order to get out there and be able to just have this control over our birthing process. Okay, my body, my choice. But when people take that back and they say, we agree that my body, my choice, we are, okay, pro-choice for you. I'm also pro-choice in what you're going to put into my body. Then they say, okay, now we're going to change that to abortion rights. Now you're endangering other people. And you see right there, they say, okay, your choice not to get this thing is going to endanger somebody else, so I am against that. So in general, most people agree that your actions taken that can endanger somebody else are in general negative, but they often find a way to excuse their personal actions that harm other people or that influence other people's lives in a negative sense. So I think On Liberty, that's what's talking about here in that sense of being a liberal, was this kind of political liberalism, to just have as much freedom from the political system that you're living under to act as a free citizen, as a free individual within the society, within the laws and rules of that society. Anarchism doesn't mean no laws, it just means no rulers that are above those laws, and that you're living under laws that are agreed upon by everybody who's in that society and understands those societies and are held to those standards. I think that's a positive thing. Okay, second to last quote, and this is from On Liberty again by Jon Stewart Mill. The peculiar evil of silencing the expression of an opinion is that it is robbing the human race, posterity as well as the existing generation, those who dissent from opinion still more than those who hold it. If the opinion is right, they are deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If wrong, they lose what is almost as great a benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth, produced by its collision with error. Again, this is one that really, really speaks to me. And this is what I consider really, really pernicious with people stifling the speech. This is what I consider really, really positive of having a society and a culture like in the United States of America that enshrines the right to freedom of speech. And this is why I was talking to that person. We hear more. A lot of the things Americans say is stupid, but they can say that. If Chinese people in general had access to the internet as much and they weren't being oppressed by the Chinese Communist Party and limited in what they can actually intake and what they can actually say out loud, then you would probably see a lot of dumb takes from Chinese people as well. This is a common thing that you actually will see. But that's okay. If somebody states something, you don't have to do it. But when you come to this empiricism, this empirical thinking, this empirical evidence, somebody says something, and as he mentions here, one of the best things to do is be proven wrong. If it's something that's important to you, you want to know what the right thing is so you can keep on doing that right thing. And then if it's not, it gets to the point where, as I mentioned my issue, where I'm constantly worried, constantly questioning myself, do I have enough evidence for this? Where if somebody comes on and tells me and shows me that, okay, they counter what I'm saying and actually have a discussion with them on that thing, and they realize, no, it's actually right about this thing. I should have actually acted on this earlier. Then I get more confidence to act on it now. And then when I come to a similar level of understanding on a similar topic, I'm not held back as much because I know, like, okay, in the past when I came to something, I actually had this worry and had this concern and conversation with somebody. Maybe I can even search out that particular kind of conversation that makes me have the confidence to be correct in what I'm actually thinking or saying and actually act upon. So that is a positive thing. That's when you can actually form those ideas and things that you can live for as a man, where you can be a woman and you can define the certain things that are important in your life. You can find a man that actually is supporting you in a sense. Is this man really supporting me? I'm not really quite sure. I'm just going to be quiet because he kind of makes me laugh. No. Bring it up. Talk to this person and say, are you doing this? Are you for real on this? And then that person talks to you and they say, okay, no, I don't really care about this. And then at that point you say, okay, maybe I'll move to my third guy. I was on my number two. I was picking my two or three, but I talked to my first one. That didn't really work out. We didn't actually meet. The person found somebody else. This second person, I thought I was going to be okay with this, but I didn't want to talk, but I eventually talked about this. Let me move to number three, and number three kind of works. Because you decided to talk and actually confirm if you were in error or if you were correct. Maybe it was completely understanding, and if you just had this misunderstanding, you just let this person go without talking about it, you could have moved on to number two, to number 30, to number 40 on the dating things, when instead of just asking these people, is this who you are? Is this what you want? I think that's a positive thing. Now on to the last quote here. Everyone who receives protection from society owes a return for the benefit. Jon Stewart Mill, The Corn Laws. Now, is this socialism? Is Jon Stewart Mill advocating for socialism, for some form of communism, for some kind of collectivist type of ideology here? Is that what he's talking about here? I don't know. But some people may take this quote and define the state as the purest form of society, then advocate for obedience to its functionaries, and as in two quotes ago, they would say, okay, we're going to compel each to live for the good of the rest, for the greater good. You have to do this for the greater good. They'll think, okay, that's the thing. Society has given you so much. You didn't build that. So you kind of owe these things back for the greater good. Then this can also be related to that earlier quote where Mills was talking about limiting his desires, where you say, okay, you're in a certain society and then you have certain things and you put those aside for the greater good. And there is something. He says, okay, as a man, you should be able to stand up and fight for things that are worth fighting for. Thinking nothing is worth fighting for is not a positive thing. You just think I'm going to desire my personal safety and that's all I'm going to look out for. I'm not going to risk anything. I'm not going to actually go at anybody who receives protection, because in many cases, and in many cases right now, if you're listening to this, there are many people whose efforts you have benefited greatly from. So thinking you can't just bring something up, bring up a statement, whether right or wrong, state your opinion. You're not necessarily forcing anyone to do anything. I encourage anyone who's not necessarily forcing someone to do something to speak out on any issue. You don't have to have a moral superiority. If you think something is wrong, say something. And when you say something, expect that in many cases people will say something back to you. By them saying simple words to you, they're not forcing you to do anything. For example, if somebody says, hey, you've joined the society, you moved from this one location, instead of complaining about all the negative things about here, claiming that you have allegiance to this other place that you may have been from, your ancestors from, that's so much better and things like that, maybe try to integrate. Somebody just making that statement is not necessarily forcing anyone to do anything. You can respond by just saying, okay, well, maybe you can benefit from these things I'm bringing from this other culture, or you can just explain to them, I don't really think the benefits that I'm having from living here come from these things that you're telling me to integrate into, and then maybe you can build your own system to do that. Then, with this one, it's another more pernicious thing that people might look through, and they can say, okay, Y'all might remember that recent World Economic Forum meeting or things like that. There was an ad. It's still online. Maybe I'll leave the link somewhere here. You can find it online. It says, "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy." I'm doing like a Klaus Schwab, this Klaus Schwab guy, the guy who's kind of in charge of that. He looks like some kind of Austin Powers villain. Like it's like you can't even make this stuff up. But I don't think he actually says the actual thing itself. But I'm still going to do his voice. "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. What you want, you'll rent, and it will be delivered by drone." And they might say that's commie propaganda. They say this whole idea of everyone who receives protection from society owes a return to for the benefit. I'm like, I don't know. But there are things that are earned. And I think you personally get that feeling. If you feel someone has given you something that you didn't really earn, I think most people in general feel the need to give back, to reciprocate that in general. I think that's a natural thing. That's something that brings some contentness to people. Where do you stand on this last quote? So now we are at the end here. I think I'll be trying to keep these to under an hour. I just found these quotes. Just took a couple of quotes, and this kind of thing I'm doing in this series. And I've mentioned this several times. I'll mention it once again. Why I'm doing this, I've benefited from the efforts that others have done that now protect me from some of the very basic aspects of nature. And nature just doesn't give an F about what you're doing. I am for a voluntary society, win-win relationships, freedom of association, general liberty. These are things that I'm thankful for. And I think Jon Stewart Mill is somebody who has advanced the case for some of these things. There's probably people that you know out there that have been inspired by things that he said or written or that he carried over that you might not have heard about him before. If you have heard about him before, please let me know some of your favorite quotes that he's had. I haven't read any of his actual works. I know that many people that I've read and been inspired by have. I'm going to take the time to read I might actually do this in a shorter video. It's like a shorter essay. So I might just do like separate, say it might be 1.5, 2 hours for the Subjugation of Women. Be interested to actually reading that. And definitely On Liberty is on my to-read list. I'm going to read that eventually. Just let me know what you think your favorite quotes and things like that are. Let me know your thoughts on what Jon Stewart Mill said. You can definitely check out links. There'll be something on the screen right now that is already in the merchandise store, the Jon Stewart Mill, Anyone But K. There's a lot of other people up there as well. Let me know who you would think would be good for this series as well. I already have a bunch of people lined up coming up in that series. Some of the things are drawn already. Some of the things are posted up on the site already without having a video to go along with it. So more of that content. And wherever you listen to this, there's also a lot of other content. I talk about a lot of other things. Other topics, some of the things you might have disagreed with in here, let me know. I'm actually even more interested with the disagreements that people have because that will either, as mentioned here, it'll either prove that I was wrong about something and I can correct myself and go forward and be more correct, or it will strengthen my ability to communicate certain things that I consider valuable enough to state in a better way, so the next time I say it or talk to someone else about it, I don't have that confusion or wrong wording or wrong sense that I may have placed it in the current conversation, in the current presentation. It's kind of a conversation if you actually interact in the comments, and we can turn this presentation into a conversation. If you're listening to this, you live in an unprecedented time as to which you can achieve much more than people could even imagine was achievable in the past. One thing that is true today, that always has been, that always will be, is nothing is just inherently owed to you. You have to work for certain things. But one thing that is different about the present, and can be guaranteed, almost guaranteed to increase in the future, is that many of the basic impediments that have prevented people from achieving certain things in the past, for most of known history, have been removed by efforts of others. And by taking the choice to act and apply some effort, you can add to this general pool of resources that continues the human flourishing that we all benefit from. And the primary person that will benefit from that effort is yourself. Even if other people don't know about it, what you do might eventually influence and help other people. It's just a great time to be alive, and I think a greater time's coming in the future. I thank you all very much for listening to these things. I do get some enjoyment from actually making this content. And it's a welcome added bonus that I can share this with y'all out there and y'all can appreciate it or just interact with it and let me know the way you feel about it. So that's it for now. Like, share, subscribe wherever you're listening to this. Until next time, there's already a lot more content you can listen to. And if you've just been a regular listener, you get into the end, more content coming.